Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is a special edition here of the Freedom Side that we are bringing to you on Wednesday in the midst of the ongoing onslaught against Gaza and the coming just several days after the significant expansion of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where the world is also waiting to see if it will become more of a regional conflict. So we are here to provide you with analysis, voices from on the ground in Gaza, and of course we'll have many guests and Rania and myself offering some opinions here. And of course, my name is Eugene Puryear, and I am one of your hosts here alongside Rania Khalek. It's always good to be alongside you, Rania. Unfortunate that, we have to be here on an emergency basis due to another war-like scenario here like we were last year vis-a-vis Gaza. But nonetheless, happy to be here with you in this moment.
Always happy to be here with you, Eugene, and thank you for everybody who's tuning in. We definitely have a great slate of guests to discuss various angles of this horrific, horrific war that's taking place on Gaza and likely to continue for weeks. And, from what the Israelis are saying, possibly longer than that. Before we do get started, I do want to remind everybody that you can support the show by becoming a member of Breakthrough News at patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where you can, of course, get access to exclusive content. But then it also allows us to do things like we're doing right now, which is this live stream and others. And of course, get access to merch like this, which is always nice to have. I love having Breakthrough News merch and other political merch. In moments like this, I like to wear it around just to kind of show what I think about things. Because this is one of those moments where you feel very, very strongly about something very important happening in the world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for those who are just tuning in, looking to catch up on some of the specific news, the death toll of Palestinians as of, very recently here, as of about 7:30 p.m. Gaza City time, 1,100 Palestinians, including 326 children, have been killed. 5,300 roughly are injured. Israeli death toll stands at about 1,200 with about 2,700 injured. Gaza's only power plant is running out of fuel, creating even more of a crisis there. And the potentiality for, the expansion still goes on. There's quite a bit of rocket fire still happening into different Israeli settlements. There are hundreds of Israeli airstrikes happening, basically constantly at all times. There's some skirmishing and allegations of skirmishing on the northern border with Lebanon. So there's a lot to be said. And before we go to our first guest, Rania, I just, maybe even to sort of frame some of this discussion about where we are, because of course here in the United States, as I'm sure you've seen, you're there in Beirut, Lebanon, this is a very one-sided presentation of what's taking place here. You would, essentially erasing the entire history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But, one number I want to give to people that I think helps frame this, and maybe get some of your thoughts on this, Rania, then we'll go to our first guest. From 2008 to 2003, the number of Palestinians who were both killed and injured by Israelis stands at 158,967 people. Israelis, 6,615 people. So I say that to say that you can see the, very lopsided nature of this conflict and the brutality meted out against Palestinians. And I think, Rania, partially what's eliciting so much shock in this moment, especially here in the United States, so much anger from supporters of Israel, is the fact that the Palestinians for once have hit back with something like commensurate force. And for maybe one of the first times in the conflict, there's not a totally lopsided toll in terms of those who are being killed and injured. And I think the fact that Palestinians have stood up so boldly in ways that I think, many of those who are against them and supporting the apartheid system thought was not possible, is partially what's driving a lot of the shock and the outrage here, and setting the tone. But I think a lot of that history has been totally lost, and people are forgetting the long toll that Palestinians have been under for almost 80 years.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I watch obviously from afar the way the reactions in the West are playing out versus what I'm seeing in the region that I am in right now. And it's much, much different because, this is the first time people see Israel looking weak and facing the consequences. Not the first time, but it's an unprecedented moment where Israel's facing the sort of like bigger magnitude of the consequences that are completely predictable from a 75-year-long colonial occupation. You colonize, you steal people's land, you attack them, you ethnically cleanse them, you push them into small concentration camps, you cut them off and besiege them, on and on. You subject them to a system of segregation and apartheid, and you surround them with electrified fences and control every aspect of their movement and how much food they're allowed to access and where they can work and what they can do and who they can see and where they can travel. And like, this is not something that you're going to get a nice reaction from. People are going to react angrily and violently to a system of violence that what you saw this past weekend did not even compare. And, I hate to break the brains of people in the West that put these crazy standards on how the oppressed are supposed to behave. But many people across this region, and I would even argue, I'm sure many people across the global South, see what happened this past weekend, and they see it. People in the West can disagree with it, but they see it as legitimate armed resistance that they were, that they thought was courageous, and they're proud to see, because you have people who've been stomped on and they hit back at their oppressors. But that's just what happens. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the history of that, beyond just Palestine. But I mean, I know we have a guest that's waiting, so
yeah. We should move on
next before we get into it. Yeah.
No, but good points. I thought it was important to frame it, as we go into this, given what I think a lot of people are seeing. But obviously, a lot is happening in the northern border between Israel and Lebanon. Many people wondering what is going to be happening, what we can expect. And we are very honored to be joined by Omar Nashabe, who is a lecturer at the Lebanese University and the editor of Al-Aqsa.com. Omar, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us. Pleasure is all ours. And I guess I would just maybe start with the $64,000 question that everyone is asking, which is, what is the likelihood that this conflict will expand, into Lebanon or perhaps with Hezbollah, moving into northern Israel or other potential eventualities?
We're already in the conflict. I mean, we're part of the cause. I mean, in Lebanon, you have so many Palestinian refugee camps, and these people want to go back home. It's a very simple story. I mean, they are living in camps. They've been living in camps for 70, 80 years. They're refugees. They first came, they put tents. Now they build homes. And, they're not allowed to, the Lebanese law does not allow them to enjoy their full rights. They are, and the conditions in the camps are difficult conditions. I mean, a Palestinian young man, let every one of the viewers just imagine a Palestinian young man. He can't go back home. He can't work in the country where he's in. What is this guy going to do? He's completely depressed. He doesn't have any hope. Well, when he sees this happening in Gaza, he has hope. He wants to go back home. He wants to have, a decent life like everybody. And so therefore, the Palestinian camps is one thing that the first thing comes to my mind when I think about what's happening in Lebanon towards what's happening in Palestine. But also, Hezbollah is a leading resistance group here in Lebanon. And, Hezbollah has been calling for the liberation of Palestine since its creation. Hezbollah was born in 1982 when Israel came and occupied Beirut and committed massacres similar to those that are being committed today in Gaza. So the mood in Lebanon, yes, everybody in Lebanon, let's put it this way, everybody in Lebanon is on their phones and following TV and wanting to know in anticipation what's going to happen. It's not going to be an emotional reaction. It's not going to be a reaction, in fact. It's going to be a strategic move by the resistance. The resistance is moving away from emotions. Now it's thinking about strategies. It's thinking about tactics. It's not going to be pushed into a war without proper calculations. I think the way the arms resistance in South Lebanon that was able to liberate Lebanon from Israeli occupation in the year 2000 and was able to protect the borders of Lebanon in the Israeli onslaught in 2006. This resistance has gone stronger today. It is capable to protect the border. It is capable to help the Palestinians. And this is our moral duty. And this is how, when we see these people who were, thrown out of their homes and deprived from a country and being lied to by all these peace process that came up with nothing, and all the massacres that came out with nothing. There was not a single proper probe by the United Nations. There's a single Israeli officer taken into held accountable for what they did to the people of Palestine. So I think it's normal that in Lebanon there is this mood where people are, supportive of the Palestinian people, and in anticipation of what's going to happen. If some people are talking about this huge confrontation, let's wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, all we can do is, wait and see. And every day there seems to be another sort of tit for tat, Ahmed, that's been taking place since all of this started between Hezbollah and the various Palestinian factions it's allied with in the south of Lebanon versus the Israeli military. But, since obviously there hasn't been a proper confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel since 2006, which, in that war, Hezbollah gave Israel a bloody nose, as we all know. And of course, Lebanon faced some devastating consequences as well, but was seen as coming out, kind of victorious in the sense that they proved, Israel was weaker than we all thought it was. And they kind of, weakened Israel's deterrent capacity. It's been many years since that war took place. And one of the reasons it hasn't taken place is because neither side wants a war for the most part. I mean, Israel, every year Hezbollah gets stronger. Its role in the war in Syria gave it a lot of experience in traditional warfare and made it stronger. It has a lot more weapons now. It's a much more capable and disciplined group than before. And Israel fears the damage it could do. It would be much more damage than back in 2006. And on the other side, Hezbollah obviously is not going to just jump into a war. Lebanon is facing one of the worst economic crises of any country in history, and it's a very polarized country politically. So Hezbollah has a lot to think about, and there's been this kind of like rules of engagement that these two sides have abided by for the last few years, where there's like a tit for tat, but they don't cross the threshold. But it does seem like something has changed this time around in terms of the level of, unity among the resistance across the region and the willingness to face Israel. So I guess my question for you saying all that is, has there been a change in the rules of engagement during this particular conflict from Hezbollah's perspective? And if so, what and why has that changed?
Yeah, well, obviously there has been a change in the rules of engagement, but it's still limited and it's still under control. As you say, it's a tit for tat kind of situation, but at the same time, there are Palestinian groups that are being very active. There are some, Palestinian groups that are going into Palestine from the border, making some military attacks against the Israeli occupiers and come back. And this is unprecedented. And there are also the use of drones and tonight there was a very interesting news. There were, alarms were sounding in all of the north of occupied Palestine. So, and people thought that there was an incursion, and that there were drones going in, and then it turned out to be, a false alarm. But a false alarm is very important in the warfare. It's a very important weapon in the psychological warfare. So we wonder if the resistance was able to hack into the system of alert and create this kind of a situation that is in favor of the resistance and in favor of the Palestinians. Now the war is ongoing, and it's interesting. Also, there's a rocket. There was a news about a rocket that fell on occupied Haifa from Gaza. That's a very long distance, a long stretch. Anyway, I think that. We have to say, amidst all this, I would like to take a few steps back and think about all these, images of destruction in Gaza. We anticipate, we are in anticipation of what's going to happen, and we are, and many people in Lebanon are perhaps, in favor of a war and more confrontation with the Israeli enemy because of all the the images of oppression and massacres that have been committed throughout years and years, and where Israel went unpunished for all these massacres. But at the same time, we look at the pictures in Gaza, and I spoke on the phone with some friends and some doctors. And we were in contact with a friend of ours who's in the Shifa hospital in Gaza, and there's no water, there's no electricity. The electricity is going to go off in like maximum 14 hours. There's not enough fuel. In the coming week, there will be food shortages. We have to think in Beirut and everywhere around the world how we can help the Palestinians, at least on a humanitarian level. We have to think how we can send in medication, necessary medication, food, and how we can get the generators to be working again so that the hospitals can function properly and the kids can get the proper care. I remind you that, and you reminded the viewers perhaps in the beginning of the show, that Gaza is one of the largest, most densely populated areas in the world, and it's completely besieged. And now they are not allowed to bring in anything, not even from the Egyptian border. And the Israelis are threatening. And the minister of the Israeli defense, he said, I don't know what Israeli defense is. It seems like it's all offense, but what he's saying is that he's not allowing anything, any food into Gaza. That's a crime against humanity, clearly. But obviously the Israelis don't care about that. They've been engaged in crimes against humanity against Palestinians and Lebanese and Syrians for many, many years. But still, we have to think about how we can put more pressure. I think the American administration, I heard today Anthony Blinken saying, no, they have to maintain a certain humanitarian passage to the Palestinians. That wasn't his position yesterday. And in fact, today we have an aircraft carrier, an Army aircraft carrier in the sea, the USS Ford. So I think the Americans now can take direct responsibility if there's a massacre and if there's a crime against humanity being repeated, because they are here. They're like a few meters away. They can see it and they're responsible of it. So we hold the American government and the American army responsible of what's going to happen in Gaza, because it seems from what we hear, from the threats we're hearing from the Israeli army and the Israeli, media, that they are preparing for a huge massacre in Gaza. And so therefore we must say today that it's a good thing that there is a huge, one of the largest army aircraft ships, American, here, so they can be held accountable since they're here and they have this might and this power and they have this this kind of they pretend that they are in control of the situation. They can actually ask the Israelis and coordinate with the Israelis the whole war. So any war crime that takes place, the United States will be responsible of that war crime.
Yeah, it's a very good point and a well-taken point, and certainly hopefully one here in the U.S. Well, really quickly before we let you go, just wanted to also ask you, because you mentioned this briefly about, some of the Palestinian factions that are active there in the southern part of Lebanon. Any significance to that, which historically I think, was expected. They were supposed to be kept back, but here they are allowed to operate. Any significance to that for you?
Yes, it's very important, because in the past there were like internal disputes in Lebanon. Should we allow the Palestinians to throw rockets on the border? And there was some disagreement on the local level. Now we're not hearing these voices anymore. I guess because the right-wing extremists in Lebanon, their big slogan is that they're against Syrian refugees in Lebanon. So they're fed up with Syrian refugees. They're fed up with refugees. So what's the argument? We're telling, okay, Palestinian refugees want to go back home. So you're going to stop them from fighting to go back to their own homeland? So this was a situation. And now the Palestinian factions are more united. Last month we had a big problem in one of the Palestinian camps. So in addition to all the difficult conditions in the camps, some, warring groups within the camps, they're fighting against each other. And that creates even more depression for the Palestinian people. So now there is hope. There is a good mood in the Palestinian camps. There, young boys, young families, they are dreaming. They're not dreaming of killing anyone. They're not dreaming of, kicking the Israelis out. They're not dreaming of that. They're dreaming of going back to their homes. Their homes that their grandfathers and their parents told them about, the place that they belong, where they belong. And I mean, and this is international law. International law says that there should be a state, a viable state called Palestine. That's all they're asking for. And it's very simple. And when I go to the States and I talk to many of my American friends, they always tell me, oh, the Palestinian issue is so complicated. Well, I don't see it as complicated. It's not complicated at all. It's a very simple slogan. I just want to go back home. I'm a Palestinian. I want to go back home. That's it. So all this fighting, all this blood, all this destruction can be avoided by just giving the Palestinians the right to go back home.
Well, I think that is the exact message that we're not hearing enough of here. And we are very, very appreciative to you, Omar Nashabe, for joining us here on the Freedom Side and giving us some of your analysis here on all these situations. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Eugene, I just want to say
Rania,
real quick, thank you for all those tuning in. I see there's many. Also, I appreciate the pro-Israel trolls in full force in that comments section.
Yep.
I've had a few people message me about that. I'm not sending Rania the comments, I swear. However, I do want to note, I'm very happy to see there's like over 2,500 people watching. Make sure you do like the show, you guys. It helps us boost us in the algorithm. That way more people can see this kind of content, because I know in the US right now in the corporate media, all you're hearing is one side. And so we, of course, are here to try to break through that one side to give a more nuanced perspective that puts the side of the oppressed and those who are fighting for a liberation struggle in the center stage.
No, indeed. And, the news coming through now that Gaza's only power plant, it looks like it is shutting down. It's running out of fuel, which is, going to create an even bigger humanitarian crisis, especially for hospitals there in the Gaza Strip. And, this is, of course, one of the biggest issues. You've got people on dialysis, you've got children, you've got others. And, just to also update people on a number that I mentioned before, Rania, and then we'll go to our next piece here. We were talking before, 326 children killed in the Gaza Strip from this bombing. And I wish I could say that was, not something that you would expect. But one number that I think other people should also know about the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, from 2000 to 2023, nearly 2,300 Palestinian children were killed. So that means that on average, about 100 Palestinian children killed every year for 23 years from 2000 to 2023. So I think people need to keep that in mind, when we're thinking about how this is being framed. But speaking of medical care, I know, Rania, earlier today, you were able to speak with Dr. Medhat Abbas, who's the Director General of Gaza's Health Ministry. We had to pre-record because of the challenges there with power and other electricity and other issues happening there. But we do have an interview that Rania was able to do earlier today with Dr. Medhat Abbas, the Director General of Gaza's Health Ministry.
I'm incredibly pleased to be joined by Dr. Medhat Abbas. He is the Director General of Gaza's Health Ministry. Dr. Abbas, welcome to the Freedom Side.
You must welcome. You must welcome.
So we are speaking to you. You're in Gaza right now. The situation is very dire. We're hearing the hospitals are running out of fuel as the Israelis have cut off fuel and access as well to medicine and food. Can you update us on the casualty count in Gaza as it stands right now, as well as the situation you're dealing with across the Gaza Strip?
Well, 5,300 are injured, and those 1,100 killed within those 5 days of the crisis. As you mentioned, the Israelis declared that decided to cut the electricity from the first day. So we were relying on the only power plant of Gaza Strip, which has stopped today. So right now we have no electricity at all.
Wow.
We are relying on standby generators in our hospitals, and the fuel that we have today in the hospitals is enough only to run those hospitals for 2 days, not more. So now the borders are sealed, so we cannot buy any fuel by all the means because the borders are sealed. They have not only closed for the fuel, but nothing is getting inside Gaza. This is including also potable water. They shut the water, and also we do not have access for food. They are not allowing food to come into Gaza. The only solution today for this crisis is to open a humanitarian corridor for the patients to go outside to be treated and for the health professionals from outside to come and extend a helping hand to our colleagues in the hospitals. The other problem that we have today is the 300,000 displaced persons coming from those whose houses are bombarded or were under heavy strikes. So they were forced to leave their homes, and they are now in schools considered as shelters. But of course, the capacity of those schools was to handle only 120,000. Today they have three times their original number. So the UN declares that they cannot handle this number anymore without having additional resources. Resources, of course, nothing can get inside Gaza. Well, the other problem is attacking the health facilities by the Israelis. In fact, they have attacked Nasser Hospital. They attacked one of the ambulance, the premises of Nasser Hospital, which is based in Khan Yunis city, southern provinces of the Gaza Strip. And also they have attacked the Indonesia hospital, and they have also stopped the services provided in Beit Hanun city because they have annihilated most of the city quarters. And now this hospital is out of service. Let me say that 20 ambulances were directly attacked during this war, and many of my colleagues were killed, unfortunately. So the situation is there's no safe place in Gaza Strip for the people to stay in. The civilians, of course, who are under fire along the hour. In fact, we have the warplanes in our skies 24 hours a day, and of course they are chilling sometimes randomly. Sometimes they threaten the people to evacuate, and sometimes not. You may find the people killed while they are inside their houses, and of course under the rebels you try to evacuate or to save those who are under the rebels, but we do not have enough equipment for the civil defense people, so the people go try to save the victims by their bare hands. I think the situation is very miserable, and without having this humanitarian corridor opened at once, I think the health system for sure will collapse, as we have no extra beds now to treat patients, and the patients are the wounded are lying on the corridors of the emergency hospitals in most of the emergency departments in Gaza.
Wow, that does sound incredibly dire. And, we've had you on this program before in the past when Gaza's been under bombardment. And it has always sounded dire, but there does seem to be, because of just the severity of this particular added siege on top of the siege, where Israel's not allowing anything in, bombed even the Rafah crossing. It seems worse than past instances of these bombing campaigns. Am I correct to say that? Is it worse this time around?
Yeah, this is much worse than any of the previous wars against Gaza. Yeah, this is the worst. And I'm waving by another land operation. I don't know what would be the goal of that, as they have already destroyed the entire blocks of Gaza City. I mean, what are they going to do inside Gaza? I don't know what are the goals exactly, because nothing is left, nothing has remained already. I mean, Gaza City is not a city anymore. Gaza was a city once upon a time. Today, it's just become some rubbles, nothing more.
I wanted to ask you also, I want people to understand that even before this recent bombing campaign, Gaza's been under siege for 15 or more years now, and has already been dealing with issues in the health sector, including lack of medications, inability to update equipment, or even lacking in equipment. Of course, there's also, not exactly like a plethora of every specialty available. And Israel in the past has actually bombed some of the most educated health professionals in the country and killed them. So can you paint a picture for our audience of what Gaza was dealing with even before this latest bombing campaign in terms of its capacity in the healthcare sector?
Well, we have had shortage of medications by 40% of the essential drug list, and 32% of the medical supplies, and shortage of 60% of the reagents required to operate the laboratories of the hospitals. And of course, the borders were not that great for patients to travel outside, as many patients were not allowed to travel outside through Erez Junction, where they should go to the West Bank or the Israeli hospitals or even Jordan. But sometimes many apply, and under the claim of bending, they have no permit, and they cannot stay. And many of them have already succumbed to their destinies, and they died inside Gaza with avoidable complications that would have been treated if they were allowed to travel. And of course, it's not only one war that we have, but we have had many escalations before. Of course, adding too much pressure on the infrastructure of the city within Gaza Strip, and leaving the poverty prevailing and the unemployment prevailing, with a very collapsing economy, with like 80% of the community relying on free food tickets prior to this escalation. Today, they are saying that it's said that the situation will be much more worse. Yeah. So, I mean, without extending a helping hand to our people, I think there will be a immediate collapse that will be witnessed soon. People will not be able to find food or potable water. I mean, that would be another additional disaster in Gaza.
And Dr. Abbas, can you give us an idea of what the situation is currently in terms of the kinds of injuries that are being seen in the hospitals, for example?
The people arrive to the hospital totally. The people, when they arrive to the hospital, they're totally disfigured. I mean, some of them are having amputations, some of them are having massive injuries, some of them are decapitated already, some of them are burned, so you cannot recognize their features. So, because those F-16, when they attack the buildings, I mean, the buildings collapse and the people are inside. Many of those buildings were attacked without any threat before to evacuate. So the people, when they go to the hospital, they are in very critical condition, which is explaining why we have more than 1,000 killed within 5 days.
And there's also been reports of the use of white phosphorus, which I know the Israelis have used in Gaza in the past. Is that the case? Are there injuries from white phosphorus that are being seen now? And if so, could you explain what that injury entails?
Yeah, when the patients arrived, many of them were burned, but I don't know whether it was phosphorus or not. I'm not having experience to judge this, but many of them were burned. I don't know, is that because of the explosions or that because of certain phosphorus? I don't know. I cannot say.
And in terms of the kinds of people who are coming in, are you seeing? There's been reports of 260 dead children having been killed in these Israeli airstrikes. So in Gaza, of course, is over 50%. Under the age of, I think, 18, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very young population. So what is the age range of the kinds of people who are being brought in injured from these airstrikes?
Yeah, but not less than 30% are already children. As you mentioned, we have 50% of our population are children, and 50% of the population are females. So yes, and it's highly dense population, Gaza Strip. It's the highest in the world. So wherever they attack, I mean, there will certainly be some civilians here or there. I mean, there is no empty areas in Gaza Strip. It's full of people. And the people are overcrowded within their homes and within their areas. So wherever they attack one house, to target those living in this house, all the neighbors will have their share of death and injuries.
And Dr. Abbas, another thing I'm curious if you could elaborate on a bit. You mentioned earlier when you were speaking about attacks on medical facilities, and I believe I saw reports today about attacks on paramedics. So on top of course, the very difficult circumstances that the health sector is having to operate in, it's also under attack itself. Could you talk a bit about that?
Well, in fact, that's not the first time. I mean, I remember a hospital which we call Al-Wafa Hospital. I remember one day I was the medical director of that hospital, and I was called midnight to see. Usually, when you have a call at midnight in a hospital, usually you think of a patient who is suffering and you want to save his life. But the surprise was that in a room with two patients, paralyzed patients, two of the nurses were trying to save them, not to save, let me say, because they will develop bed sores without, mobilizing them in their beds. So two of the nurses were getting inside the room with two beds, the patient inside this room. They received one bullet. They were shot by one bullet that penetrated the heart of the first one and stayed in the heart of the second nurse. It killed both of them. One of them is Lobbad, one of them is Abdul Karim. but both of them have died inside the room of the patients. So they were inside the hospital. They were assassinated inside the hospital. So that's what we used to see from the Israelis regarding dealing with the health facilities. This is not the first time. I remember in the last wars that they have attacked a hospital called Al-Aqsa Hospital. I was the director of that hospital that day, and the situation was very miserable. The doctors were not able to access the hospital, and I left the hospital to another general hospital to bring extra staff. In the way, I hear the people saying, "Oh, congratulations, Midhat, you make it, you're still alive." I said, "What happened?" They attacked the hospital when I left it, and almost 70 were wounded, and 3 of my colleagues were killed inside the hospital that day. So we used to see, and they have attacked the Wafa Rehabilitation Hospital one day, totally annihilating the hospital and level it on the ground. So that's not the first time when they attack ambulances or they attack health facilities, which is, of course, I don't want to say this is against all the international laws or international humanitarian law. These are war crimes, and they have never ever brought to justice. They have never ever held accountable for those crimes that they commit against our people. That's why they keep doing the same crimes and the same crimes. That's the situation in Gaza, and we have been seeing that for the last 20 years, not 1 or 2 years.
And you mentioned how this time there needs to be, you're talking about the need for a humanitarian corridor, as well as because the needs in Gaza are just so immense that it can't even be fulfilled under these circumstances. If this continues, if this current level of siege behavior by the Israelis, where they're not allowing in fuel and they're not allowing in medicine and they're not allowing in food, if this continues, tomorrow, the next day, the day after, give me an idea of how bad the situation will get if there isn't some sort of intervention to allow access to Gaza.
Death will be in thousands every day. The death toll will raise to thousands every day, and the community will collapse, not only the health system. I assure you.
Like what else? Beyond the health system.
Humanitarian corridor should be open right now. This war should stop right now. And we should have the requirements of the humanitarian requirements of the people together immediately. Otherwise, we will have a very bad disaster occurring in the Gaza community.
Is there anywhere, do you feel there's anywhere safe in Gaza right now?
Well, just if we leave the Israelis to commit the same crimes when they're supported by President Biden, if this tragedy is stopping, I think we will witness civilians dying in Gaza, and that's not what they deserve. In fact, I assure you, and I assure Mr. Biden, that all dying today are children and women. So, and I think he has only seen half of the picture, but he has not seen the Palestinian part of the story. He has not seen a picture. He has not heard from us. He heard only from one side and took his decision. I think this is unfair, and this will be responsible directly to kill more in Palestine.
And Dr. Abbas, lastly, what is, if there's one thing that the people who are watching this program remember from what you're saying, like what's your ultimate main message for our mostly Western audience to hear from Gaza, from a medical professional?
Just do something to save Palestine. Do something to save Gaza. Go to the streets. Go to your governments. Explain to them that there are people dying here who have done nothing in this life except that they want to live free on their land. Our land is occupied. The people are defending themselves to have dignity. We have no airport. We have no harbor. We have no access. We cannot travel easily. We have poverty, prevailing poverty. I think this is enough. We have been under siege for 20 years. It is time to enough. We need everybody who can help us through the media, through pressurizing, through lobbying to their government, stop the Israelis committing those crimes and to let Palestine be free. I think this is my message for today.
Dr. Abbas, I want to thank you for joining us.
You must welcome. You must welcome every time. Thank you.
Was Dr. Medhat Abbas, who is the director general of Gaza's health ministry, Dr. Medhat Abbas, there, interviewed by Rania. And of course, just to follow up on that, that was a couple hours ago. As of now, at least 326 children have been killed in Gaza. You can add that on to the 2,292 killed from the year 2000 to September of this year, and to the overall toll of 158,967 Palestinians killed or injured between 2008 and September of 2023, 6,615 Israelis. So you can see this is sadly maybe the worst it's ever been, but it's very much in context with the long, multi-decade history of everyone, men, women, children, civilians, otherwise, pretty brutal conflict on multiple different levels there, Rania. But glad you were able to do that, and certainly glad people have been able to join us from Gaza. We'll have some more voices from Gaza coming up, but we want to switch gears to get into more of the maybe geopolitical aspects of how Israel's able to get away with some of this because of their high-level support. And of course, we all know about the United States, but the European Union is also in there as well. And to talk more with us about this, we are very, very honored to be joined by Daniel Yegich, who is a professor of communication at the Lebanese American University in Beirut. Professor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, I guess maybe to ask in this context, everyone hears a lot, as I said in the beginning, about the U.S. role in backing the Israeli apartheid system. But what about the EU? I think they often try to present themselves as, sort of kinder and gentler on this issue, more critical of settlements, more helpful of Palestinians. I mean, how truthful or not is that picture?
I think the EU invests probably maybe even more effort than the United States in constructing this entire discourse that helps protect the Israeli regime and shield it from any potential accountability. The EU has been investing a lot in perpetuating all of these tropes about human rights, democracy, freedom of speech, and so on, while not only just backing Israeli apartheid, but also enabling it. So if you just think about when it comes to the rhetoric, we oftentimes hear in mainstream media about the so-called two-state solution, about the alleged peace process, negotiations, which is also an integral part of the political discourse in the EU and the US, but pretty much only exists there because the Israeli regime is quite transparently committing this genocide that it is committing now live on camera for everyone to see, while, again, the EU is investing a lot in shielding the Israeli regime by presenting Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and so on. But in the end, of course, the Israeli regime is a proxy of the US the same way the EU is in many ways, but also an extension of the European Union or Europe as such in Western Asia.
I think that you've written about that idea before, where you've called the issue of Israel Zionism itself foundational to European ideas of itself.
Yes.
I'm curious if you could elaborate on that, and especially in the context of countries like, for example, Germany or France, which have their own histories. I mean, most of Europe does, but in particular, these countries are some of the leading ones in the European Union, which have their own histories of dealing with anti-colonial uprisings, or in the case of Germany, I mean, really being responsible for the existence of Israel in the first place, given its role in the Nazi Holocaust.
Absolutely. I mean, everything that Europe bases itself on today can be traced back. And when I say Europe, I mean Western Europe in particular, and those colonial powers. All of this bases itself on a history of centuries of exploitation of the rest of the world, with Europe, again, being a very small minority in terms of population in relation to the rest of the world, and having exploited through genocides, massacres, and all different forms of colonization the rest of the world, to be in this position, which, as the EU foreign minister said, a garden compared to the rest of the world being a jungle. So here, if we look at apartheid, which actually is the system that's implemented in Palestine, pretty much is part and parcel of European identity, even on a global scale, because there is the idea that the European white individual is superior. And here, even if we look at the European discourse that talks about moral supremacy and all of these Orientalist fantasies, it also has a very racist a very racist structure in it. And when it comes to Germany in particular, I mean, what the Israeli regime is doing in many ways is similar but obviously different. What Africa has been doing, what France have been doing in Algeria. We can name a lot of examples, but it's the core of European identity, the idea of identifying itself by constructing an evil other and suppressing them and killing them. And in the case of the Israeli regime, this is one could argue, the most sophisticated and highly advanced form of colonialism, in which all of these European fantasies of colonial conquest and advance are being actually enforced by the Israeli regime. So when we talk about the Israeli regime, we cannot talk about it as something different necessarily from Europe, but and maybe even part of this Eurocentric core that oppresses the rest of the world.
No, I think these are incredibly important points, and I mean, we saw the sort of the situation with the EU being one of the first to say we're going to cut off all aid to Gaza, and then of course they claim that they then walked it back because they thought they looked so poorly. But another element of this also too is I think you look at France, you look at Germany, is these are some of the countries that seem to have some of the most repressive regimes against Palestinians speaking out. I mean, I saw the demonstration that took place in Paris. I think yesterday was technically banned. I've seen activists getting arrested on the street in Germany since this new conflict has started. But I wonder if you could talk about that as well, because, of course, I think everyone also thinks of Europe as sort of the home of civil liberties and freedoms, and so on.
Yeah, Europe is very, very oppressive, especially when it comes to freedom of speech and especially when it comes to Palestine and other third world liberation movements and situations. And here, Zionism is oftentimes enforced through state policies. And Germany is an excellent and very sad example of how Zionism is a standardized political practice that is being adhered to by all parties in the political spectrum, from the far right, which is very Zionist, to the so-called left, which has very strong elements of Zionism. So Zionism becomes a cultural practice and becomes something that is part of the social structure. So it's not up to debate. It's something that is there. So the so-called Israel's right to defend itself becomes part of a cultural norm that needs to be followed by the general public. And this obviously is very dangerous in many ways because it, first of all, targets Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but also Palestinian refugees, Palestinian diaspora in Germany and elsewhere, and criminalizes them oftentimes just for existing and for being Palestinian. And we've seen instances now today and yesterday of, as you mentioned, France, I think UK as well, and other places in Europe where Palestinian flags are being banned and criminalized. And this has been the case in Germany in many incidences throughout the past decade at least, where of anything Palestinian, including the kafir, the scarf that is oftentimes associated with Palestine, can lead to people being ostracized, but also can lead to police violence. And there are several documents of police violence against Palestinian protesters. And another important thing to mention here is also the media. So if we look at, in particular, Germany being the largest country in the European Union and Europe in terms of population, in Western Europe with 83 million people, if we look throughout the mainstream media, there is, if just to take today as an example, mere incitement against Palestinians. And so the question about, there's not even the pretense of any form of nuance or discussion. Is a very clear standing with apartheid, with racism, but racism and apartheid and genocidal incitement being presented as human rights and so-called, as the European Union leaders oftentimes call it, shared values.
And when we speak of shared values, I mean, there are a lot of shared values there. But I just, very quickly, Daniel, I also wanted to just ask you to touch on the issue of Germany specifically, because I think there's something incredibly ironic that Palestinians are consistently being forced to pay the price for a German crime. And I think Ali Abunimah, who we've had on the show before many, many times to talk about this issues and others related to Palestine, has repeatedly made this point that if Germany wants to make up for the Holocaust rather than forcing Palestinians to have their land stolen, perhaps Germany should give away some of its own land to the victims of its crime. But I'm just curious if you could just quickly speak to that irony. I'm wondering, and also you grew up partly in Germany, so you would know, how often is that talked about with the, using the Holocaust, Germany's crime, not Palestine's, to justify the ongoing oppression of Palestinians.
Exactly. And it's interesting, there is oftentimes this narrative that Germany is committed to protecting the Israeli regime because of some sort of guilt. But we could, I would also, ask if there's any form of guilt, if someone would feel guilty for this genocide that Germany committed in the Second World War, why continue the same similar policies elsewhere? So it's in many ways Palestinians have replaced Jews as one of the victims of German racism. And so if we look at the language that's being used against Palestinians, the very open racist incitement, there's something very obviously very fascist about it. And Palestinians are oftentimes constructed as subhuman in similar ways as Jews were back then. So Germany is actually, the Holocaust is part of a continuity of German crimes. So go back centuries ago, just to mention the genocide in Namibia, the first genocide of the 20th century committed by Germany. Germany's staunch and very passionate support for apartheid in South Africa and beyond. And Germany continues to stand on this side of history. So Germans, oftentimes, when I say Germans, I'm talking about the general population as much as politics and media, like to emphasize that they or claim that they may have learned something from the Holocaust and sort of try to present their support for apartheid in Israel, Palestine, as some sort of lesson learned and, hashtag never again, and all of these very sad discourses where anti-Semitism or the danger of anti-Semitism today is being used to police Palestinians. But in the end, of course, there is a very open anti-indigenous, anti-Palestinian racism, which is just one or the latest and most visible and most violent form of racism that the German government is committing. But of course, there is no idea about, I would very, like to contest this idea that Germany would feel guilty, because if they did, they wouldn't be committing this. And as you mentioned, Germany could very well also return the land to the Jews who actually came from Germany instead of using them as human shields in Palestine.
Wow.
Daniel Yagic, professor of communication at the Lebanese American University in Beirut. Really appreciate you being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.
Rania?
Well, I mean, I think it's such an important topic to discuss, and I'm just so sick of seeing Ursula. I never pronounce her name right, which I think is fair, given that my name's always butchered. Is it like von der Leyen, the head of the EU? Von der Leyen family, who actually has some ancestry in the U.S., I believe, linked to plantation owners. I'm just saying. And then I've seen Joseph Borrell just repeatedly saying, "We stand by Israel. We stand by Israel," even as all of these Israeli leaders are very openly referring to Palestinians as animals. But you had Netanyahu say, we're going to turn Gaza into a desert. You heard the Israel, I think you heard the defense minister literally say human animals when referring to people in Gaza. And there was actually like one of the Israeli military spokespeople who speaks in Arabic so that the Palestinians hear the message clearly, referred to them as beasts. These are the people currently executing a carpet bombing campaign in Gaza using genocidal rhetoric. And you have these Western leaders standing up and pledging their undying allegiance to this disgusting display of war criminality. And so I think it's really, really important to connect it to all the sort of like history of genocides and colonialism that, as Daniel puts it, is like a fantasy Europe is living out through Israel.
Yeah, no, I think it's very, very true. And of course, the complicity of that is very real. And I think that what you're speaking to, the discourse from these Western politicians, also the Israeli leaders of, the various things that are being said to be so exceptional. I mean, one other fact that I think is notable for people about the Palestinian struggle, as of a little earlier this year, Israel was actually holding the largest number of Palestinians and without charge or trial. So just indefinite detention since 2003, about 1,000 people, Palestinians, detained without charge or trial. They can be detained, indefinitely in many of these cases. And, it has the name indefinite detention or detained without charge or without trial. But when you go to someone's house, you take them from their home, you take them to some other place and you imprison them. That's akin to kidnapping. But this is the type of thing that happens so frequently to Palestinians by the Israeli forces that the world has become almost desensitized to it. And so we're hearing, kidnappings and murders and other things as if Palestinians have not for almost 70 years been living under a place where, as we said earlier, almost on average, roughly 100 children a year killed for 23 years. Nearly, almost 160,000 Palestinians killed or injured since 2008. And that's compared to 6,000. And you look at the exact deaths, which I can actually tell you right here, 2008 to 2023, before this conflict, just before, 6,400 roughly Palestinians killed to 308 Israelis. So, we have this day in and day out reality that exists. And I think that is something we have to keep in mind. But we want to keep the show going here because we have some more voices from Gaza, individuals who were able to join us earlier. And, because of the power situation there, we were not able to interview them live, but we really want to thank them for joining us. But Wafa Al-Udaini, who is a Gaza-based journalist and activist and head of the Gaza-based media group, 16th of October media group, spoke with you earlier, Rania, about the situation in Gaza.
Well, we're pleased to be joined by Wafa Al-Udaini, who is a Gaza-based journalist, an activist, and head of the Gaza-based media group, 18th October Media Group. Wafa, welcome to the Freedom Side.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And Wafa, you're joining us obviously from Gaza, and everybody, the entire world is watching. I think many people are watching in horror as Israel has been pounding Gaza for about 4 days now. And Israeli officials announced that they wouldn't be allowing anything into Gaza, not electricity, not food, not medicine. Can you tell us what the situation on the ground is in Gaza?
Yeah, actually, the situation is extremely, extremely difficult here in the besieged Gaza Strip. And we are talking here about genocide is being against the Palestinian people inside here in the besieged Gaza. Like the occupation warplanes actually, they attack across Gaza Strip. Like they targeted several residential buildings, several homes, shops, streets. Everything is a direct target to the occupation wars. And right now we are talking about nearly more than 1,000 Palestinian or more than 900 Palestinian get massacred in the Israeli airstrikes on the people of the besieged Gaza Strip. And in fact, we are talking about right now, just hours ago, the only power plant got shut down due to the blocking of the crossing. You know that the Israeli occupation authorities just today say that they are going to block the fuel and the food from entering the besieged Gaza Strip. And this is exactly what happened. And this is considered like collective punishment and considered war crimes against the Palestinian people. But no one do anything to stop this brutality from keep going. The non-stop actually coming here in Gaza, actually it affects everything here. The Israeli warplanes actually are destroying the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. They mean it. Actually, if you just go to some areas, you find that they bomb everything, and you don't know. There is no reason to hit this, to or this building or that building. And the reason that we feel that they are doing this thing is just to harm Palestinian and to cause as much destruction as they can, and to cause as much massacres as they can, as many massacres as, because since we are talking here about today is the 5th consecutive day of the Israeli airstrike on the Gaza Strip, and actually we are talking about dozens of massacres are being committed against the people, like entire families. got erased, got killed or got massacred during the Israeli airstrikes on their homes. Most of them were in their home. They were safe. They were just gathered. I think that the only area, the only place that is safe is their home. So they just gather in masses in their homes, thinking that this is like their home can protect them from the Israeli brutality. But in fact, they targeted so many residential buildings and homes, massacring so many families. And most of the victims, in fact, are from the kids. From the Ministry of Health, he told me that most of the victims that we received in the hospitals are from the kids and the women, So talking about, like they were just actually Israeli narrative and Israeli propaganda trying to convince the world that they are attacking like resistance targets or something like that. But in fact, they are just attacking the people everywhere here across the Gaza Strip. And actually, for the people who do not know that Gaza, actually here in the besieged Gaza Strip, we don't have sirens, we don't have shelters, we don't have any resorts just to protect us from the Israeli warplanes and the drones. We only have our homes. Every one of us, every place is a direct target to the Israeli warplanes. They control our sea, our ground, our air. So they control everything here in the besieged Gaza Strip, and then they just lie in the media and say that we ask the people of Gaza to leave Gaza and so on. But in fact, where we are going to go, no place is safe. You are targeting every part here in the blockaded Gaza. Every part is being pumped by your brutality. And just they asked us to go to Egypt and stuff, and then they closed the Egyptian, they closed the border, and then the occupation warplanes, in fact, they hit the Rafah crossing, which is controlled by Egypt, but in fact they follow the Israeli orders. In fact, so actually the situation here is really so terrible. Like we are talking here about no electricity so far, since the only solar plant, the only power plant shut down. Then we don't have electricity at all, and we are using right now generators and batteries. But we don't know exactly when our batteries and our generators are going to run out of fuel, because we just have just to survive for just a few days. And in fact, like talking about the occupation and how they violate the international laws, but no one, like everyone, turns like a blind eye to the Israeli brutality and violations against the Palestinians here. They are using during their airstrike, they are using the phosphorus bombs, and the phosphorus bombs are illegally, are internationally banned, and they are using it, and no one just condemn or say anything regarding this. They attacking journalists. They hit a building that housed many media offices. At least three journalists got killed, and since the very beginning of this attack, nearly eight journalists got injured, and others got massacred, and others got injured. And in fact, most of them, they were wearing their press uniform, but they attacked them. And also they attacked ambulances. Nearly 11 ambulances got attacked by the Israeli warplanes. And in fact, that the situation, the health sector before this airstrike or this attack on Gaza, it was on the brink of collapse. And now we are talking about there is no electricity. So this means that also the hospitals are not going to operate because of the lack of fuel, as they announced in a press release yesterday. If they keep blocking the fuel, this means the hospitals also will stop, and then they are not going to receive any of the victims or any of the dead or injured people from the Israeli airstrike. And in fact, like, the situation here actually is going to be maybe in the coming days a catastrophic, in fact. But like, in the mainstream media, like, we have the distorted image, and they are just accused us of very big lies, and only they hold, or they just express the Israeli narrative, and no one, that Israel prevented the international journalists from entering Gaza because they don't want anyone to report exactly what is happening. They don't anyone to enter Gaza and then discover that they violate the international law. They want to massacre the people. They want to cleanse to massacre them, and to let me say slaughter them, in fact, because like, if you just go to some areas, you feel that these areas, they were just so beautiful places, so beautiful cities, and then now it turns into ghost areas, and this is really so terrible. And we are talking here about only 5 days of aggression, and it seems that it's not going to be short one, like others during like other aggressions. It's going to be long one, as they declared. They are not talking about the truth or ceasefire agreement or anything else. And in fact, the world is accusing us as Palestinians that we initiate this, so we deserve this, which is not true at all. We didn't initiate this violence. Actually, violence begets violence. The Israeli occupation, they started the violence in before 75 years when they occupied Palestine. We as Palestinians, we have been witnessing and subjecting to the Israeli brutality and subjugation and apartheid since 75 years so far, and no one talk about this, and they are just show or express their sympathy with the Israeli hostages and Israeli prisoners that the resistance have, but no one talks about what is happening in the Israeli jails. We have nearly 5,000 Palestinian prisoners inside the occupation jails. We have nearly 170 kids in the Israeli jails, and 40 women inside their custody, in fact. But and not all of that. They are deprived of their basic rights. They just very like, before talking to you, in fact, I received news from inside the Israeli jails that they cut the electricity in all the occupation prisons, so they don't have electricity, as it is the situation here in Gaza. And in fact, let me just say that the Palestinian detainees inside the Israeli jails, actually, they have been subjecting since a long years from the Israeli torture and from the Israeli brutality against them. And in fact, that so many of the Palestinian detainees, like, before they entered the Israeli prisons, they were healthy. They were really in a good health. But in fact, when they got released, most of them got cancer, got chronic disease, and some of them lost their minds. And it's really a horrific thing for our prisoners. And recently, Bin Gvir, who is considered like one of the ministers in the current government, actually, in fact, he just many times incited for killing the Palestinian detainees, for depriving them of their basic right being of having treatment, of having surgeries, because so many of them need surgeries. In fact, like for example, Israel Jabi, she spent like 8 years in the occupation jails. She suffers from severe burns in all parts of her body, and she needs more than 8 surgeries to be able to eat by herself, because she cannot eat by herself. She cannot go to the bathroom by herself. She cannot even brush her hair. She cannot do anything with herself. Always she needs someone to assist her. But in fact, the international community and the U.S. administration, they just turns like a blind eye to the Palestinian suffering, because they dehumanize them. They are not consider the Palestinians as a human being who deserve to live. So that's why they just right now they are talking about aiding the Palestinians, the Israelis with weapons, while Palestinians are just terrorists and need to be wiped out or stopped by the occupation army. And in fact, just let me tell you something which is so important. Maybe the others will think, or the world think, that we seek for wars, we like bloodshed and so on, but in fact no one like to see his beloved one covered in blood or even massacred in front of his eyes. We loved our families. We don't seek for wars at all, but we just fed up of the occupation brutality against our people. Like the suppression and the subjugation becomes like a daily basis actions by the occupation, and everywhere, not in here in Gaza. Here in Gaza, we have been like suffering since 70 years from the blockade, which prevents us from many things, from our basic needs, in fact. And like the situation in occupied Jerusalem and the situation in occupied West Bank, even worse. Like in West Bank, they are seizing and stealing their land, uprooting their fields and their trees. Like the Israeli settlers' terrorism, actually, it is relentless, in fact, because like in every single day there is an Israeli attacking a Palestinian. Maybe like what happened to the Wabsha family or their Muhammad Iftar and others. They burned them alive. They burned them alive, and no one talks about this thing. In fact, so the thing here is like we have been subjecting to nearly apartheid since long years, and the world couldn't they didn't see anything, except when they see that the Israelis are being attacked. They think that we are the people who started this, and they didn't know the truth. And now they are talking about so many lies from the mainstream media, and in fact they are talking about killing babies and the stuff, but in fact they didn't show us anything. There is no pictures, no videos reporting or showing their lies. And in fact, the Palestinian resistance freedom fighters, when they who are right now infiltrated the Israeli settlement and having like a fight with the Israeli occupation, with the Israeli occupation forces. In fact, they showed us. It's not them who were talking. In fact, like I saw so many interviews with Israeli women. They got interviewed in Israeli media outlets. They were talking about how the Palestinian fighters treated them. They told them that we don't harm women, we don't harm kids, we are not going to kill you. So they were really shocked of this, and they expressed this thing in the media, and this went viral indeed. So that this thing makes makes the Israelis so angry. That's why they want to distort the image of the Palestinian resistance freedom fighters, in fact. But the reality, like I'm just here. I hope that everyone, like the journalists from across the world, can hear me. I'm just inviting them to come here to Gaza to report by yourself and to see the brutality, to see the subjugation, to see the Israeli, genocide and massacres that are being committed since nearly 5 days so far. And I'm talking to you, and I'm using some alternatives to be able to talk to you, like batteries, and trying to get internet from neighbors, actually. Internet, because like the connection here is really so bad, as they hit so many areas here across the Gaza Strip. So this thing affect the internet access, affect the water supplies, and many infrastructure here in Gaza. So in fact, maybe in the coming days, if the crossings, and if they still ban and block the fuel from entering Gaza, this means that in the coming days we are not going to have even internet. We are not going to contact anyone outside Palestine. No one will know what the Israeli occupation is doing, even the international journalists, because no one is here. They prevented them from entering. They depend on some reports from the Palestinians here, and actually there are so many things. I really like to report and really like to talk to you about. But in fact, I think I spoke for so long.
Well, I understand why, and I'm so happy we're able to speak to you, because I know it's quite difficult for people in Gaza to speak to the outside world right now, given the circumstances that Israel has put the Gaza Strip in. I wanted to ask you before we start to wrap up here, Wafat, I know that we've talked several times before, and you said that this bombing campaign seems much more catastrophic and dangerous than in the past. And we've heard the Israelis say, these very vicious statements about, we're going to bomb every corner. We're going to turn Gaza into a tent city. We're going to turn Gaza into a desert, saying everybody should leave. But as you mentioned, they bombed the crossing to Egypt. Where in Gaza is safe? I know that you have children. I can't imagine what it's like having to be in a place that's being relentlessly bombarded this way while having to care for children. So is there anywhere that is safe in Gaza for you?
Actually, there is no place is safe. In fact, like as I said, we don't have shelters. We don't have anything to warn us that there is an Israeli missiles is coming. They are just dropping the missiles on the homes indiscriminately. And in fact, just this morning in my neighborhood, they targeted a house that nearly 15 members of this family, like six of them got massacred, and still the others are still right now. There are so many paramedics and others that are trying to pull them out of the rubble, and so far nearly seven are missing so far. They are trying to pull them out of the rubble. So this is like the situation, not with my neighborhood, like many areas, many cities are experiencing this massacre this genocide, in fact, because they just without warning, they hit houses with the families are gathering and maybe sleeping, or I just remember in day two, family, they were just having their breakfast when they targeted them, and in fact they got massacred. All the entire family got massacred, and this happens. This becomes really it happens in a daily basis, in fact, like in many families. Here we are talking about today. Just today, I just remember that I reported nearly 6 or 7 families got they got their homes bombed by the occupation warplanes, and many members of these families, they just got killed or murdered, and others got injured as well. But since this silence, the whole world is silent against this oppression, and I'm really expecting that this massacre will continue. And like, what is the saddest thing here is that we are experiencing like this genocide or this collective punishment, and we hear them. I mean, the international community and the U.S. administration. They say that we want to aid Israel with weapons to stop the Palestinian terrorism. It's just like something that makes every Palestinians here is really so. Every Palestinian here angry of this action from the international world. Because really they betrayed us, and how they are talking about human rights, and how they are talking about the violation of international laws and so on, while they see by themselves, they witness by themselves the Israeli violations, by themselves they witness the Israeli using the banned weapons, internationally banned prohibited weapons, and they said nothing. They just aided them with whatever they have, in fact. And regarding like the people here and how they cope up with this, yeah, like like I just remember 2 days ago I saw a video of a man like holding his slain daughter who got killed in an Israeli airstrike. He was holding her, saying that whatever you do to us or our families, we will never surrender, we will never kneel, because we know that the occupation is doing this thing just to let the Palestinians kneel, and just to let the Palestinians surrender, and then saying that stop, we don't want to resist, we have to accept this situation, and so on. But like no one accept to be oppressed for long years. We have been, yeah, as I said, been witnessing or surviving from many Israeli aggressions. But enough is enough. We had enough from them. They have like to understand that this is our will, and we are seeking for freedom, nothing more. And it is our right according to the international laws. It's our right as occupied people to resist the occupation. And in fact, like the Palestinians, this is the last choice for them, because in the past they used the peaceful and the popular resistance. In fact, they used it, and after that, when the Palestinian Authority, when they came to power here in Palestine, they used the negotiation, but they gain nothing. And the other thing, here in Gaza also, we used the peaceful demonstration. And what happened? Like so many people in masses, they went to the separation fence protesting the Israeli occupation and siege in Gaza, and calling to return to their land. And they were just peacefully protesting, holding just Palestinian flags and holding some banners. And what happened to them? The Israeli occupation forces who were stationed near the separation fence, they shot and killed at least 300 of the peaceful protesters, among them journalists and paramedics and kids and women and so many, like thousands also get injured, not only injured and maimed, in fact, because they mean to kill the spirit of the Palestinian people by, when you see like a man who is in his young age, and then he lost his leg or his arm, then this thing will will destroy his spirit, and this is what they want. They are trying to destroy the spirit of the Palestinian people by any means. So we use all the ways possible in order to defend ourselves, to free our land. But in fact, the occupation, they didn't understand this language, and in fact, this is the last choice for the Palestinian resistance, because they have enough and from this occupation, so they have to move on and to protect the people here in occupied Palestine, not only in the Gaza Strip.
Well, Wafat, I want to thank you for joining me. And I mean, I guess, is there one last thing that you'd like to mention to our audience? Since I know that we were pre-recording this because you were worried about running out of electricity, given the fact that Israel has blocked Gaza from receiving fuel.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak up for my people and just to tell the world about the truth and what is happening on the ground.
Thank you, Wafat.
Wafat Al-Ludani, Gaza-based journalist, head of the Gaza-based media group, 16th of October media group. And thank you, Rania. I'm glad you were able to do that earlier today. And, we want to keep moving here, but I do want to say that, I hope people, go back and share that and know what's going on, that day in and day out that we don't hear, the things that you don't really get a sense of that Palestinians are feeling, that's, totally wiped out in the mainstream media. Every year, approximately 500 to 700 Palestinian children, some as young as 12, are detained and prosecuted by the Israeli military court system, 500 to 700. The most common charge, Rania, you might not be surprised to know, is rock throwing. And the thing I think is even more notable about that, Save the Children recently did a study. They interviewed a number of these former child detainees. 86%, just want to read to get this right, 86% said they were beaten in detention. So think about that. Hundreds of Palestinian children taken every year, mainly for rock throwing, into prisons, children, and then beaten by grown men, probably mainly. Children just being beaten on a regular basis. I mean, that's the type of violence, that has become endemic in Palestine and is the everyday reality for Palestinian people. And you don't hear about that. And I think that's why it's important to have people like Wafat on to give us that context.
Yeah, I think that's one of so many elements of the just background, what's become background noise for the daily violent and human system that Palestinians are subjected to, so that Israel can maintain a supremacist state that privileges one group of people over the indigenous people there. And it's so normal that the second Palestinians react to it, the media is like, oh my goodness, how could these people act like such violent savages, as if they're not reacting to a system that literally kidnaps their children and beats them regularly. And again, one of many of the violent elements of the system Israel has created to control Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. Well, we want to turn to some other, regional and international geopolitical ramifications of what we have going on. And we are very, very happy to be joined once again by Giorgio Cafaro, who's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Giorgio, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you. Good to be with the two of you again.
Well, really glad to have you with us again. And I hate to throw some sort of breaking news on you, but maybe to bring it into a larger context, about 20 minutes ago, it was reported by The Guardian that the Biden administration is privately expressing disappointment that, and I'm just reading from The Guardian, that Saudi Arabia, far from condemning the attacks by Hamas, is maintaining the violence would not have occurred if Palestinians had been granted an independent state. And I wanted to just start with that because I think it speaks to, one of the elements of the conflict that we're really seeing, Giorgio, is a very different set of narratives. The U.S. government, which, rarely says much about the Palestinian issue, except here, there, in little small pieces, is very, aggressively taking the exact same line as the Israeli government. But we're seeing many regional governments and obviously people in the region and around the world take a very different view that I think they view as more balanced. So, I just wonder what you think about the potential sort of ripple effects here of the position that the United States is taking, which seems so at odds with even, many of their close allies.
Yeah, I think in the region we're going to see anti-Americanism rising in this upcoming period, especially with the United States deploying an aircraft carrier right off the coast of Gaza. I know that in the Arabian Peninsula right now, in the GCC countries and in Yemen, there is a lot of sympathy for the people in Gaza, and there's a lot of rage toward Israel and by extension, the United States. And I think when we hear statements from government officials in Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, it is reflective of where public opinion definitely is in these countries. This is not to say that Hamas as a political organization is loved by everyone in the region. There's certainly a history of tensions between Hamas and different groups in the wider Arab region. But right now, I mean, I think the anger is really directed very much on Israel right now. The narrative in the West is that this surprise attack into southern Israel on October 7th was unprovoked. That's what you hear a lot of people in Washington say, always using the word unprovoked. But I think in the Gulf and throughout the greater Middle East, obviously, you know, with the exception of Israel itself, that narrative about this being an unprovoked attack is rejected across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, there's been a few elements of this that have sort of like had, I don't know, ricocheted into other parts of the world. One has been the issue of Russia. The U.S. has, you know, Putin's been kind of making these statements to anger the U.S. I think there's also an element there that speaks to the fact that the war in Ukraine has caused a rift between the Israelis and the Russians. And on top of that, you know, I think Putin recently made some comment about that aircraft carrier being like, what is the U.S. doing? Russia was, you know, making sure to basically kind of blame the root of the problem on the U.S. in many ways. I'm sorry. So I guess, can you just like speak to the role of Russia here? Because it's kind of been, you know, it hasn't been center stage, obviously. In fact, the war in Ukraine since it started hasn't really been in the news as much. But you do seem to have this rift between the pro-Ukraine and then like the anti-Russia, you know, side, where you even have Zelensky attacking Putin, saying Putin's pro-Hamas.
Yeah, definitely complicated once we bring in sort of the Russia angle here. I think it's important to realize that Russia has been quite balanced toward the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. As I'm sure all your viewers are aware, Russia and Israel actually have a very deep relationship. And over the years, Netanyahu and Putin have a personal friendship, a personal relationship that has become quite deep. It's a very strong relationship between the two leaders. And when we've been looking at the situation in Syria, there's actually been a lot of coordination between Russia and Israel, which has fueled quite a bit of some degree of tension between Russia and Iran, actually. But at the same time, Russia is against Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. Not only does Russia refuse to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, but Hamas officials over the years have paid visits to Moscow. The Kremlin's view is that Hamas, whatever one may think of the organization, is a group legitimately representing the people of Gaza. And that has certainly fueled some tension between Israeli and Russian officials, with Israel being very angry at the Kremlin for doing these things that sort of legitimize Hamas over the years. Now, when this current crisis erupted this month, I think it left Russia in sort of a weird position. On one hand, it has to be noted that Russia has gained from this in some sense. To be sure, international attention has shifted from Ukraine to the Middle East. That's something that Moscow is very pleased with. There's also good reason to consider that the U.S. will have to divert energy, diplomatic energy, weapons, money, and other resources from Ukraine to Israel. For obvious reasons, that would be, great news as far as the Russian government is concerned. At the same time, Russia does have some concerns about how this could play out throughout the wider region. As everyone knows, Lebanese Hezbollah has played an important role in sort of stabilizing the Syrian government next door. This is important to Russia's interests in the Middle East, seeing to it that Bashar al-Assad's government maintains the control that it does have inside Syria. So in the event that the tensions between Hezbollah and Israel would escalate, potentially spiral out of control and turn into an all-out conflict, that would probably result in Hezbollah fighters leaving Syria to come back to Lebanon, and the Russians don't want to see that happen, given the existing volatility in Syria. So it's not so clear whether the situation in Gaza and Israel is on balance positive or negative from the Russian government's perspective. I would say it's pretty mixed, but nonetheless, it is giving Putin an opportunity to really make the case that U.S. leadership and U.S. diplomacy in the Middle East has been a failure. The Russian line is that what is going on with the Palestinians and Israelis killing each other these past few days is the U.S.'s fault. That's a message that resonates very well with Arab audiences, and I think that the Kremlin is going to continue putting out these messages when addressing this crisis.
You know, one issue that I think a lot of people are wondering about that I'm curious your thoughts on is how this will affect the possibility of Saudi-Israeli normalization, which of course the U.S. was working very hard to achieve. And I think maybe relatedly, what sort of pressures does this put on different Arab countries that have already normalized with Israel?
It's a great question. I think I was sort of in the minority on this, but even before the Hamas surprise attack against southern Israel, I did not think the chances were good Saudi Arabia would join the Abraham Accords. And I know that many people disagreed with that assessment, and they were expecting Saudi Arabia to normalize. But right now, amid this current crisis, pretty much, I think all experts agree that Saudi Arabia is not going to be on the verge of normalizing diplomatic relations with Israel. I think the Saudis are trying to sort of take somewhat of a, sort of sit back and sort of watch how things pan out approach. There are so many unknown variables in the equation. We don't know if/when Iran will be playing a more direct role in this crisis. Same can be said about the U.S. and a potential direct role played by the United States. We don't know the ways in which this conflict could spill into other countries, such as Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen. We just simply don't know how this is going to play out. If the Israelis are going to do an on-the-ground invasion of Gaza and try to occupy this coastal enclave where 2.3 million people live, if that were to happen, it's unclear sort of how much mayhem would result and what the consequences of that would be. And also, we don't know how people throughout the wider Islamic world would respond to that. The bottom line is Saudi Arabia normalizing with Israel right now would just be way too risky. The Saudis have a leadership role in the Islamic world. The king of Saudi Arabia is the custodian of the two holy mosques. And if there's a situation where there is so much widespread anger and rage throughout Arab countries and Muslim majority countries, it would be very damaging to Saudi Arabia's religious legitimacy to normalize with Israel right now. When it comes to the Arab states, though, that have joined the Abraham Accords, such as the UAE, well, it puts them in a tough place right now. They want to benefit from a normalized relationship with Israel. There's many ways, whether we're talking about investment, trade, intelligence sharing, defense relations, tourism, and all these obvious ways UAE and others can benefit from normalized relations with Israel. But given public opinion in the region, there are certainly some serious political risks for any Arab leader or any Arab government that is seen as allying with Israel. Interestingly, though, we should point out that the UAE responded to the Hamas incursion into southern Israel by very, very strongly condemning Hamas. And that I think, sent a strong message about the UAE's commitment to its newly normalized relationship with Tel Aviv. But again, I think the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, and the Moroccans are going to try to be careful in sort of striking a balance. But, if this violence exacerbates, or if this spreads into more of a region-wide conflict, striking that balancing act will be increasingly difficult.
And, Giorgio, just one last thing here, and that is the Yemen factor. I mean, you have the Houthis threatening to essentially join Hamas in an attack on Israel if the U.S. intervenes in the conflict, saying that they'd be ready to participate with missile and, drone strikes and other military options. And so, what is that? Do you think that's actually like something that would be possible? I mean, I'm not sure, when a lot of these groups say U.S. intervention, I'm not sure entirely what they mean, because this couldn't happen without the intervention of the U.S. on so many levels. But obviously they're speaking to something there. It's not necessarily an empty threat. And then also, like, if that were to take place, like, what might that mean for the Gulf states that have up until now managed to have this kind of like peace taking place and at least like a de-escalation of the war with the Houthis?
Yeah, well, just last month, there was some real diplomatic progress in relation to the Yemen conflict. The highest level Houthi delegation to ever visit Saudi Arabia went there in the middle of last month, and there were talks in Riyadh that the Saudi leadership said were very productive. That Houthi delegation went with an Omani delegation, and that raised some optimism about the Saudis and the Houthis coming closer to some sort of a pact, as kind of some truce. But the tragedy is in the Middle East is that often progress that diplomats achieve at the table can get reversed by violence on the ground, even in another part of the Middle East. And I think we're worried right now that that's what's going on. As you pointed out, the Houthis recently explained that if the U.S. would get directly involved in this crisis in Gaza, and obviously given the U.S. relationship with Israel, U.S. vetoing UN Security Council resolutions, the U.S. arming Israel, everyone knows the U.S. is involved already and has been for decades. But the red line would be a direct U.S. military intervention in Gaza. The Houthi leadership said that if that happened, all U.S. targets in the Middle East are fair game for the Houthis. Now, if you're in Yemen and you're talking about U.S. targets, you're talking about targets in the UAE, other GCC states. And this is to say that if the U.S. takes an action that the Houthis see as crossing their red line, and if they make good on their threat, then that would really damage the peace process between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis. And that is obviously something very troubling to all the diplomats from different countries and UN officials who have been working so hard to try to wind down the Yemen conflict.
Giorgio Cafaro, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, as always, really appreciate you joining us and all your analysis here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's amazing how many, like, it's amazing when you think about the ramifications just across the region that this war not only has already had, but could continue to have. And then you just have these completely reckless officials from Israel to the US to across Europe, not really caring. It's like, whatever.
Yeah.
Who cares?
No,
I stand with Israel. That's all you hear. That's all you hear.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, one wild card I'll just throw in here too, and the issue that was, raised towards the end about, what the Houthis potentially could attack. Another one is Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, which is actually very close to Yemen. So, I mean, it just gives you a sense of how this thing could really grow in a big way, especially if the United States, is entering in a more direct way. So, we want to get ready to move to our second guest. Although one thing I want to know, because we've been talking a lot, I think a lot of our themes is the difficulties for children in Gaza. In 2021, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said that the Gaza Strip was hell on earth for children. And that's before this conflict. So it gives you a sense of what people have been living with. But we want to continue to turn our attention here a little bit to the discourse here in the United States, in the political realm. vis-a-vis the current escalation in the conflict. And as we continue, we're very happy to be joined by the 2024 presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Claudia de la Cruz. Claudia, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I could be wrong about this, but I think I have it right. I think you were the only presidential candidate from any party of any type here in the United States who was at the many large demonstrations that took place over the weekend in solidarity with Palestine. Why would you be at a demonstration like that? Why was it important for you to be there?
I mean, this is a matter of justice, Eugene. This is a matter of justice, is a matter of humanity, is a matter of standing for what's right. You know, people have been talking about this being a story of two sides, and we have to hear the two sides, but no one's actually been hearing the story of the Palestinians for the last 75 years. And this is a David and Goliath story. This is the oppressor versus the oppressed, the colonized versus the colonizer. And so it's very clear there was nowhere else to be but out on the streets in defense and support of the Palestinian people. It is true that war is ugly, that the loss of human life is tragic. It is gut-wrenching, and I have been going through the most difficult times, as many of us have, those of us who have a conscience, seeing the images of parents carrying their babies, seeing the wiping out of an entire, space where people live and where they're forced to live as if they're in an open air prison. It is horrendous for civilians who did not sign up for war to have to live through war that has been imposed and waged on the Palestinian people by colonial and apartheid forces that are the Israeli forces, and that is paid for by the U.S. government. Like, the U.S. government takes money from tax-paying people in this country and sends $4 billion a year to mass murder Israeli children. I mean, you were talking about the numbers. The numbers are horrendous. You're talking about over 100 children, who are killed. They're killed by the Israeli. And so what moral authority and what level of, grace can you grant to a state that is one colonial, that's an apartheid state, that is a racist state, and that obviously works hand in hand with U.S. imperialism? And so, again, there was no other place to be than outside in the streets with the Palestinian people, demanding that Palestine be freed from a colonial regime that has been there for way too long and imposed and created by the United States of America.
I think it's so important that you framed it that way, because the U.S. is, of course, backing this to the tilt. They've already sent more weapons. They've sent an aircraft carrier. And I just, I'm kind of watching the rhetoric from abroad, and I'm in the Middle East. So, I mean, the conversation here is much more open in a way that it's not in the United States. So, one thing that I have noticed is over the years, it has seemed as though progressives and even liberals were more willing to speak up on the issue of Palestine and for Palestinian rights. But it's like the second there's a reaction, and this is the point I've seen you make, the second there's a reaction to colonial violence, it's like suddenly all that's off the table. And I'm just curious, as somebody who's running for president, somebody who is involved in politically organizing, somebody who, is involved in rallying for Palestine, what is it like being in that space during this time when it's kind of like all these people suddenly just fade away because they're not willing to stand up when it actually matters?
You can't sell out your principles. That's my answer. There is no way that you could sell out your integrity, your principles, and your humanity to what is the system. Ultimately, a lot of these folks, whether they're progressive, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're aligning themselves with the U.S. imperialism. They're aligning themselves with colonialism. And the only reason for anyone not to take a stand in support of what is right is because you're going to get something out of that exploitation. You're going to get something out of that oppression. And so there has been, whatever that looks like, whether it is maintaining your position as an elected official or maintaining those who are, cutting your check or guaranteeing your seat, and you're not standing necessarily in your space because the masses of people have placed you there. Obviously, corporations have placed you there. Obviously, finance capital has placed you there. Obviously. And so, they are securing their position within the system. And I think, what I've learned through political organizing and what I hold dear from the possibility of being able to do this political campaign that we're engaged in, to be able to build organization, is to be able to give the working class the confidence to stand up against these type of atrocities, whether they happen in the United States or they happen across seas, because we know that the same system that is serving to equip the Israeli forces is the same system that beats our kids and kills our kids in the streets for the only reason of being Black, for the only reason of being poor, because it's inherent. White supremacy is inherent to U.S. imperialism, is inherent to colonialism. We just got to see the way in which these people are talking about the Palestinians. Barbaric. That's what the colonizers utilized against Native Indigenous people and still do. Barbaric is what the white folks that lynched a whole lot of Black people called Black slaves that were fighting to be free. And so if we can't make those connections, we're gone. And so these progressive and liberals are just basically showing their colors and are showing exactly who are the ones that are cutting their check.
Let me also ask you this. You are running for president of the United States, so perhaps ostensibly in 2025, come January 20th, you too will be confronted with this question about how to address the U.S. relationship to the Israeli government. What sorts of proposals would you have about how the U.S. should position itself vis-a-vis this conflict?
I think it's important to raise and say that peace without justice isn't peace. And based on that principle, stop financing. We have to stop financing massacres across the globe. We need to stop investing 90% of our budget into the military. We need to start divesting from death, and our platform is very clear on that. We are proposing a 90% cut to the military budget because we understand that there are people in the United States that are in need of those funds to be able to live, and people elsewhere need and deserve the right to live with dignity and with justice. It is completely crazy and it's unbelievable that the United States of America would spend close to $1 trillion a year in mechanisms of death and war. And so, we are proposing to build relationships with nation states that are based on solidarity. The United States could have called, Biden could have called and said, hey, this is not a time for bombing. Maybe this is a time for us to be able to engage in some sort of conversation about how we're going to give the land back to the Palestinian people. And how are we going to plan for people to come back? And think about a transition and how that would look. But the United States is uninterested in doing that. I mean, I was reading the Wall Street Journal today and was seeing how, all these tech and surveillance companies, Lockheed Martin and, Palantir's Technologies, their stocks are surging. War is profit. And so we need to stop as a nation investing in war machine, investing in a war economy. We need to be able to build another type of society here domestically and other types of relationships. And so I think we're very clear that the Palestinians have the right to exist, and they have the right to resist, and they have the right to defend themselves. And we want to create a society where Palestinians don't have to fear that the United States will send anything, anywhere, to continue to wipe them from the face of the earth.
Well, I love the way you put that. And I also just want to ask you about the broader implications of all of this, because obviously you put this in the context of U.S. imperialism and you are running for president. So what do we say to the rest of the military-industrial complex that this is a part of?
What do we say? What do we say to the rest of the military complex? I mean, again, our at least speaking as a presidential candidate, for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, we're very clear on our line as anti-militarism, anti-imperialism, and anti-war. And we understand that corporations like Lockheed Martin, corporations like Palantir Technology should not be profiting from death. And so we also talk about seizing corporations. And obviously, these corporations need to either cease to exist or be recreated to actually serve in benefit of the people. But when we're talking about the military-industrial complex, it's those complex precisely that we want to do away with, because they can't exist if we are looking to build peace and justice in this world.
Claudia de la Cruz, the 2024 presidential candidate for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eugene,
yep.
I think that something that we should discuss before we wrap this up here is something we opened with, and that is, listen, I understand that people are struggling with the idea of people who are under colonial occupation resisting it. And I think that Claudia made a really good point when she mentioned that war is ugly and the casualties of it are tragic and it is preventable. However, historically speaking, people who are facing settler colonialism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, a lot of the things that Palestinians are facing, they have stood up and they have been involved in armed struggle. And in some cases, they've managed to liberate themselves. And so I know that I think it's important to raise that history because, a lot of people, we just passed Indigenous Peoples Day, formerly known as, Columbus Day. I think it still is to some people. But, you will see a lot of like liberals and progressives being like, yeah, we support Indigenous rights and settler colonialism was horrible. And we support, the struggle against that and the armed struggle against that because it was like 200 years ago or 500 years ago or whatever. But we support slave revolts. But then the same kinds of people today are just horrified if Palestinians are really anybody under assault by imperialism, occupation, colonialism, whatever, stands up and hits back. So anyways, I know you had some things you wanted to say about that history that, everybody wants to just pretend was like, Indigenous people throwing flowers at white settlers or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it in the right context of just coming off Indigenous Peoples Day or weekend, however you want to look at it, here in the United States. And I mean, listen, I mean, obviously the horrors of war are very clear to everyone, and it certainly can look, very callous. But I mean, quite frankly, when you look at this context and this history and why it's important, I mean, these sorts of eruptions and types of resistance are exactly what happens when you have a totally asymmetric power balance where people are completely and totally oppressed, where every single, law or, a treaty or agreement that's supposed to protect them is constantly violated. And when all the most powerful forces on earth seem to be colluding in that violation, leaving them with very little recourse in terms of how they proceed, other than perhaps, to resist or just to die. And I think that when we look at the history of the indigenous peoples, this is something that becomes extraordinarily clear. And I would encourage people really to read the history. I mean, when you look at things like the Powhatan uprising in 1622, which happened in the area of Jamestown, where the Powhatan people whose land was being so heavily encroached upon, they actually started to realize, happened again in the 1640s, by the way, the so-called Third Anglo-Powhatan War, they started to realize, hey, wait a second, these people are not actually here to be our friends. They're trying to take and to steal our land, and they will not leave. And every agreement we've made with them, they've broken. And in those cases, look at it, the Powhatans versus the English in the 1620s and the 1640s, they had no choice but to stand up and to fight back. And when you see what happened to them ultimately and how so many indigenous people were extinguished and genocided in this country, I think people look back and they say, well, yes, it makes sense. I mean, you should look at the Pueblo Revolt of 1680 in what's now New Mexico, where Pueblo people who were living under this brutal, theocratic Spanish conquistador imposed reality where their communities are being totally and completely destroyed. Their culture is being eviscerated. Just before that revolt, a number of their traditional religious leaders just hanged and executed for not being on board with the Catholic theocratic realities. And those people rose up in what is now New Mexico. And yes, they killed many people. And many of them fall into, the case of what we would call civilians. But they also evicted the Spanish from this area for 50 years to protect their cultural heritage and practices that people were coming to destroy in every possible way, and to destroy them along with it if they did not fall in line, and sometimes even when they did fall in line. You look at the Yamasee uprising of Native Americans as well. But you can also look, as you mentioned, at Nat Turner's rebellion. I mean, I think Nat Turner has rightfully become almost the reference point for slave rebellions here in the United States of America, because, what some have deemed the Turner cataclysm was so shocking to slave owners that it really rearranged the entire political scene of the United States and entered almost like a new phase of the struggle against slavery. And of course, Nat Turner's rebellion was widely hailed by abolitionists, certainly by all Black people living in the North, and by, most Black slaves. But of course, Turner himself said subsequently that they did in fact use indiscriminate violence in the early parts of their raid, and on purpose, because he said they did it to try to strike fear into the hearts of the slave owners. They killed over 50 people in the course of, not that long amount of time. And, they weren't all slave owner, older people or soldiers or whatever. Just read the history and you can see what it is. And of course, when we're talking about the Native Americans, when we're talking about Nat Turner, this was exactly what was said about them at the time, that they're ruthless, that they're bloodthirsty, that they're murderous barbarians, they're animals, that we have to do everything possible to kill them, which is why every uprising of indigenous peoples in America was then subsequently used by the settlers themselves to increase their level of violence by saying, look at how, these people are so savage and so barbarous. The same thing with the slave uprisings that we saw over and over and over again. The Haitian Revolution is another great example of that. Everything that was being said at the time of the Haitian Revolution towards these Haitian revolutionaries by world public opinion was the same thing. I mean, the term terrorist wasn't in use then, but they're calling people devils and murderous and barbarous and doing the worst things possible. And, all of that was not false. There was a very violent uprising where these slaves, took control of their own lives and their own destinies. But of course, when we look back on that in history, we look back on it differently. We look back on Indigenous Peoples Day and the many positive things that are coming from that. And we say, yes, we need to get rid of, for instance, these racist mascots, and we don't want to celebrate this old cowboys and Indians, old Western shoot 'em up style of American history. And I agree, we should not celebrate that. But we also can't forget that when we think about those old Westerns, and some of us, even when we'd watch those old Westerns, we'd think, man, I wish the Indians could win one of these. Well, when the Indians really did win, they were brutally and totally, destroyed from a public opinion standpoint. And then subsequently, physically in the further offensives that went on. But, when the Indians really won, they were all called murderers and the worst possible people ever. And I'm not saying that to be callous. I'm not saying that to both sides it. But I think that it's very easy to look back in history and say, well, it was 400 years ago. It all seemed justified, without putting ourselves in the shoes of where Palestinians are today, where they feel like they are in an extraordinarily similar situation, and I do not disagree with them that they are. I mean, you look at the context of what's going on, the total asymmetrical power relationship that they are in, the fact that every single international law that is supposed to protect them is violated every hour of every day, and no one cares, and the most powerful nations on earth actually collude to make sure that Israel never sees any sort of responsibility or accountability for violating things that even these governments say is illegal, and the subsequent realities that have come from that. I mean, we've said it again and again, but I'll just say it one more time here to close to give people a sense. 158,967 Palestinians killed or injured between 2008 and September of 2023, as compared to 6,615 Israelis. Their land is stolen on a regular basis. The settlers who are coming into the West Bank and other parts of this who are just stealing land despite the fact it's allegedly illegal. Olive fields being uprooted, sewage being pumped into fields so that people are not allowed to farm. The Gaza Strip, where people are trapped in the most densely populated area on earth without any, water or electricity. Let me read you this, Rania, and this comes from just before this ever happened. From 2020, this is the Washington Post. There's not enough electricity and infrastructure to run Gaza's war-ravaged sewage system. Hospitals, schools, homes are similarly running on empty, worn down by the lack of clean water, electricity, infrastructure, and jobs or money. Barely anyone has enough clean water to drink. The only local source of drinking water, the coastal aquifer, is full of dirty, salty water. And I said it before, 500 to 700 children, some as young as 12, arrested every single year. The number one crime is rock throwing. 86% of them reporting they were beaten by grown adults while in detention. An average of 100 children killed every single year for 23 years in Palestine. I could go on and on and on in places like Hebron, where they're taking people's homes and they seal up their back doors because they say, well, you can't walk into the back alley because Palestinians aren't allowed to go there. This is an Israelis only, which really means Jews only area where you can walk. And that's not to say anything about religion, but it is to show about the religion of the people themselves, but it is to show that the Israeli government is using an ethno-religious exclusive apartheid reality. They're dividing the land in every possible way. You know, in Gaza, 45% of people who apply to get out of Gaza to get medical treatment because of what we've already heard, that there's inadequate medical care, it's just flatly denied. And for the 55% who are allowed, which includes cancer patients and people like that, you can wait 6, 7, 8 hours at a checkpoint just to have some teenager, just because they want to have fun, tell you to turn around and you're not able to get your chemotherapy. I mean, this is the daily violence, brutality, death, humiliation, apartheid that people are living under in Palestine. And the fact of the matter is, the reason why there are so many people who can't say that this is somewhat akin to what we've seen with the indigenous peoples in America, that it's akin to what we saw with the slave rebellions in America. The reason they can't say it is because they can't come to terms with that reality, that the project of Israel is an apartheid project that is designed to destroy the Palestinian people in every way possible, to steal their land and impose a reality on them that they don't want and kill them if they stand up or say anything about it. They don't even have to stand up and do anything. And they want to think that that's a just project. It's not a just project. And this is why you've seen, it's not just Hamas. And I'll close on this. The whole idea that this is just Hamas is all designed to play into the Islamophobia of Americans, to say it's just a bunch of crazy Islamic radicals. That's why the Israeli forces are now calling Hamas ISIS Gaza. The reality is every Palestinian faction, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Palestinian People's Party, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, all of them of various different ideologies, religions, secular and different things, are all supporting this 100%. It's why, as our colleague Kate Pritzker put out in a recent video, why you have almost all of the NGOs in Gaza and in Palestine saying we put 100% of the blame on the Israelis. There's a reason why Palestinians feel united, and it's not because they love war. It's not because they're beast and because they're violent and because they're bloodthirsty, but they're in a totally asymmetric power relation where no one anywhere does anything to help them ever. And the people who have the power to change their life and relieve their suffering are complicit in their oppression every single day, and the covering up of that crime, which is exactly what we see right now in terms of how many of these Western governments are approaching this. And in that context, just like the Powhatan in Virginia in the 1620s and the 1640s, just like the Pueblo in what is now New Mexico in the 1680s, just like Nat Turner, just like Gabriel Prosser, just like the Stono Rebellion, just like the Haitian Revolution, just like all of those people, the Palestinians are finally saying, you know, if no one is going to do anything for us, we have to do something for ourselves. War is not pretty. It's never something that is fun, but it is a reality that's here. And people have to ask themselves, which side are you on in this kind of conflict? You have to look at those historical precedents. And if you want to say, I value Indigenous Peoples Day in America, if you want to say you value the tradition of Black people in America freeing themselves from slavery, then you have to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians resisting their oppression today. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, and they don't like to see and hear people have solidarity with resistance, but they have to put it into that context, and they have to understand the 75 years of total dispossession, marginalization, oppression, and exploitation that Palestinians have been subject to with no aid from the outside except from average everyday people.
Well, I think that was beautifully and powerfully said, Eugene. And I think it's the perfect point to close on. I just want to remind people, first of all, thank you so much for watching this live stream. Please do make sure you subscribe to Breakthrough News if you haven't already. Hit that like button because it does help us in the algorithm, particularly with an episode like this where there's just like a tsunami of coverage of misinformation, honestly, and a very one-sided coverage of this conflict. And also you can support Breakthrough News by becoming a patron at patreon.com/breakthrough news, where you can access exclusive content. And yeah, I'll give it to you from there, Eugene.
No, well, thank you so much, Rania, and I appreciate that. And thanks to you for also being able to jump in and do those pre-records. I want to also thank our Breakthrough News team that, normally we obviously do the Freedom Side on Thursday, but, dropped everything to make this possible and worked hard over the past 24 hours to put us here. But of course, thank you to everyone who viewed this. And I hope you have the opportunity to share, if not this live stream, some of the information you got from it so that we can continue to push forward with bringing people a well-rounded perspective of what's happening vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So for myself, for Rania Khalek, for our whole Breakthrough News team, see you next time.